Okay, so we're gonna keep going with our next section. Last time we started talking about the focus of this entire unit, which is basically the idea of factoring. When we get to the last section of this unit, we will use factoring to do something productive. Factoring means writing something as a product of two things. And what we did last time was we factored out common factors, and we did that over and over and over. And then we came up with our first process, which is if you have four terms, you can factor things by grouping. And that's a fun thing to do. But probably as you go through, definitely when you go through this class and college algebra and you get to pre-calculus, if that's where your math destiny is going to take you, you are going to see things called trinomials more often than most other things. For whatever reason, mathematically, trinomial, the prefix tri means there's going to be three terms. Okay, tri means three. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through our strategy here of factoring polynomials that have three terms, so that we can do things with them in this unit, next unit, as we go through the rest of this class. So basically, factoring means you are doing the reverse process of multiplying. So what I thought it would be good to do is just to real quick remind ourselves of what it means to multiply these two things together, x plus 9 and x plus 5. Because when I factor my trinomial, it's going to end up something like this. Two what's called binomials, two things with two terms in them. And so the process, probably some teacher along the way that you had at algebra at some point introduced you to foiling. It's a nice little acronym to remember to multiply all four parts together. And so FOIL just goes like this. We're gonna go ahead and multiply. So I'm gonna multiply the first. So I'm gonna multiply the x times the x. That's my f in foiling. And so when I multiply x times x, what do we end up with? X squared. Beautiful. Excellent. Well done. There's my firsts. And then I'm going to multiply my outers. So that's the things that are on the extreme outside. That's my O in my foiling. And so that's x times 5. And x times 5 is just 5x. Then we'll multiply the two things closest together. That's my inners. That's my I in my foiling. Probably should have wrote the letters somewhere else, but that's okay. And so then we put the I right there. And so 9 times x is 9x. And then last but not least are my lasts. Okay, the 9 times the 5, that is 45. So my FOIL, my FOIL. And here's why I bring this up. Is because I just wanna, as we're going through in factoring, which is doing the reverse process, I wanna see where we get these things. So this last number right here, this 45, that came from multiplying my two lasts. So remind me of a couple bits of trivia that are gonna help us today. When I get a positive value, this is a positive 45, what signed numbers, what times a what, will give me a positive outcome? Either a negative times a negative or positive times a positive. So there's a little bit of information that this last number will help me figure out. And that's going to be, what are the signs of the number? So when I have a positive, it's either going to be two negatives or two positives. And then when I go ahead and collect my like terms, I've got my 5x and my 9x, that's 14x. I see that the 14x came from adding both of those middle terms, the outers and the inners. So if I look at how I would climb back up the ladder from the x squared plus 14x plus 45 up to my x plus 9, my x plus 5, I see here that I need the two factors of 45, 9 and 5, that also, since they are the coefficients, add up to this middle thing, this 14. And that is the principle, and we're going to practice this a bunch of times on this front page. That's how we're going to do this. So for instance, my next example, we're going to factor example 2. It says x squared plus 13x plus 30. So we're just going to use the clues that we see to be able to fill in and factor this. Now notice, here's what's special about these problems, and it's going to be different when we turn to the second page. And all the problems on this page right here, there is a 1 in front of the squared term. Okay. So there is the number 1 in front of the squared term. That makes our process a little quicker. It's good to start out with these problems so that we can see what's happening. So here we go. X squared plus 13x plus 30. So I've got a 1 in front of the squared term. So I'm going to write down my 2 sets of parentheses. I'm going to unfoil this, and you're going to help me. So firstly, the x squared, what times what? There's really only one choice here. What times what gives me x squared? X times x. My firsts have to be x times x. There's no choice. And now we're going to use the clues that we're given to figure out what are the other numbers. So here, what I need 2 factors of 30 that are going to add up to 13. Now, before you shout out the numbers for me, let's consider the signs. This is a plus 30, right? A positive 30. So what are my choices of signs? Either 2 negatives or 2. What part of this trinomial tells me which I'm going to use? Am I going to use the 2 negatives or 2 positives? Why am I using the 2 positives? Yeah, because they got to eat positive 13. Excellent. So I'm just looking at the clues. You guys are solving the mystery for me. I appreciate it. So we're going to use the 2 positives. And now, what 2 factors of 30 are going to add up to 13? 10 and 3, right? 6 and 5 would give me 11. 30 and 1 would be 31. So it's going to be 10 and it's going to be 3. Hey, Perkster, could I have put the 3 in the first one and the 10 in the second one? Yes, by all means. It does not matter. Okay, so just as long as you have an x plus 10 and an x plus 3, you're good to go. Anybody got a question, comment, or concern for me? All right, exercise 1 right next door. Same problem, just slightly different numbers. Give it a try. Y squared plus 9y plus 14. All right, let's see how you did on this one. So again, there's a 1 in front of the y squared. So when there's a 1 in front of the y squared, I can just jump right to, okay, here's my 2 sets of parentheses. I'm unfoiling. What do my firsts have to be? Y and y. There you go. Y times y. That's the only choice right now because y squared is y times y. Next thing, what are my signs? This is a plus 14. So what are my signs going to be? Both positives, because they're going to add up to a plus 9. And then what factors of 14 are going to add up to 9? 2 and 7 or 7 and 2. It does not matter what order. I'm just doing them in the order that I was told. 2 and 7. Y plus 2, y plus 7. Anybody get something different that we need to talk about? All right, do the next one right below. Exercise 2. X squared plus 13x plus 36. All right, let's see how you did reading the clues on this one. So once again, there's a 1 in front of the squared term, so I can jump right into my 2 sets of parentheses right here. I'm almost positive you would tell me x squared has to be x times x. So we're good to go. Now, next thing, what are my signs? What do they have to be? Okay, this plus 36 tells me they're either both positive or both negative. And the plus 13 says both positive. And then what factors of 36 are going to add up to 13? 9 and 4, great. So I know that 36, we say 6 times 6. Well, 6 plus 6 is 12, so that's not the right pair. You all have calculators. Use them freely. All you do when you encounter a number that maybe you don't know exactly what pair of factors, just take like a factor of 6, take 2 and move the 2 over here, right? And so then you'd have 3 times 12 when I move the 2 over here. Okay, just fiddle around with the numbers. I told you last time, my promise to you on the test, everything will factor. Okay, I'm not here to try to trick you or mess you up. On the test, everything will have something that you can find the factor for. Okay, so we're going to use 4 and 9, I think, were the factors that were told to me, and that's great. All right, exercise 3, right next door. It's the same process, but make sure you pay attention to the clues. There's one little thing that's different about the next one. Bless you. All right, so x squared minus 15x plus 56. So there's a 1 in front of the x squared, so I'm just going to write down my parentheses. The x squared has to be x times x. All right, what are the signs going to be on this problem? Why a negative and a negative? What is the clue that tells you that? The negative in front of the 15. Remember, the 56 is still telling me the signs are the same. I've got a positive 56. So your choices are both positive or both negative. And so then what determines it is in the middle, just like you told me. Okay, I'm just repeating just so that it locks into our long-term memory. Great job. Proud of you guys. That's good. And then what are the two factors of 56 that are going to add up to 15? 7 and 8 or 8 and 7. It does not matter what order you put them in there. Great. All right, do the next one. Exercise 4. All right, so here's my two sets of parentheses. There's a 1 in front of the squared term, so z squared has to be z times z. And then once again, the clues tell me what are the signs going to be on this one? Both negative, because a negative times a negative is going to give me my positive in front of the 20, and a negative plus a negative is going to give me the negative 12. And then what two factors of 20 are going to add up to 12? 2 and 10. Great job. Okay. Exercise 5. Another one just like that. Won't take you too long to do, probably. Okay, so just like the previous two problems, okay, I've got a positive 6, so the signs are going to be the same. Going to add up to a negative 5, so they're both going to be negative. And then what are the factor choices for 6 that are going to add up to 5? 2 and 3. Great job. Okay. So let me do another example just to make the problems a little more interesting and kind of complete our talk about the signs and what they do. The next one, example 3, says x squared, minus 8x minus 20. So notice on this problem right here for the first time, we've got a negative in front of my last number there. So what is that going to tell me about the signs? What do they have to be in order to get a negative value? Positive times a negative. There is no other choice. So positive, the dot means multiplication, negative. That's for your notes. A positive times a negative when I do that. So my x squared has to be x and x. I need a positive and a negative. It does not matter what order you put them in here. So I'm going to put the positive first, then the negative. But if you already wrote down negative and positive, keep it. Doesn't matter. The only thing that does matter is that you make the negative go with the right number, the proper number. So here's what I need now. When I add a positive and a negative number, remember, when you learn to add positive and negatives, okay, they go different directions on the number line, right? So no longer are we looking for two numbers that they add up. Now we take the difference between them because one's going in the negative direction, one's going in the positive direction. So now so I hope that didn't confuse you, but let me try to clear that up. I need the two factors of 20. Now, since they have different signs, they're not going to add up to -8. They need to be 8 apart. What two factors of 20 are 8 apart? 10 and 2. And then I think I heard somebody say it already. Which one gets to be the positive and which one gets to be the negative? The larger is negative, the 10 is negative. Yes, you all are saying the same thing. Brilliant. I love it. And so for those of you who said it, for anyone who doesn't realize why does the 10 have to be the -1? What do they add up to? -8. The result is negative. So the larger number, the larger value has to be the -1. So -10 and +2 are my two values right there. The next few problems are just going to involve the signs where they're going to be different, okay, just so that we get to practice this. So do exercise 6, please. All right, exercise 6. There's a 1 in front of the x squared, so x squared has to be x times x. And then my signs, this is a -8, so my signs have to be a positive and a negative, or negative and positive. Again, the order doesn't matter. Don't be confounded by that. And what two factors of 8 are going to be 2 apart? +2 and -4. And why did you make the 4 the -1 and 2 the +1? It's 100% right. Yeah, they got to add up to a -2. Anyone not following along? Please let me know. I want you to be able to practice this and get this down pat, because you're going to use factoring a lot between this class and the next class, college algebra. You will use factoring a lot. It's worth putting in the little bit of effort to be good at this, please. All right, do exercise 7. So there's a 1 in front of the squared term, so y squared is y times y. What about this problem tells me my signs have to be different? The negative in front of the 21, okay? So positive and a negative, or negative and positive, doesn't matter. And what are the two values that I'm going to use that are going to be 4 apart? -7, +3. Excellent job. Do exercise 8. And if you have a question about any of these, please let me know. I'll come to you. We'll talk about it. Nail this down. So my x squared has to be x and x. There is a negative in front of the 33, so that tells me my signs have to be different. So a positive and a negative, negative and positive doesn't matter. And then this time I need the two factors of 33 that are going to be 8 apart. 3 and 11, which one gets to be the positive? Which one's the negative? The negative gets to be the which? I'm sorry, the 3. And then the positive is going to be the 11 because the 8 is positive. So they have to add up to a positive 8. We still doing okay? I flip the page. Just a couple more like this, and then we're going to talk about what to do if there's not a 1 in front of the squared term. So exercise 9 is more of the same. So just go for it, please. So again, there's a 1 in front of the t squared, so it's going to be t times t. There's a negative in front of the 30, so that tells me the signs are different. And I'm going to have a positive what and a negative what on this one? Positive 30 and negative 1. Okay, so if I did positive 30 and negative 1, okay, that indeed does multiply to give me negative 30. You're right. But when I add positive 30 and negative 1, what's the result there? That would be 29. So that is a fully legitimate problem. I could make up that problem, but that's not this problem, unfortunately. So it's not going to be 30 and 1. But the nice thing about factoring is you can try again. Okay, so if you don't get it the first time, then just give it another go. Positive what and negative what? Perfect. Positive 6, negative 5, because they are 1 apart. Great job. All right, so the next one is my example. I just want to show you the what to do if there is a variable here at the end that's squared. Doesn't really affect anything. Okay, it just looks like it looks. So here we go. Let's go through this problem, and then I'll show you what to do with that y squared right there. So again, there's a 1 in front of the first squared term. So x squared is going to be x times x. The 16 here is negative, just like the last 5 problems. So I'm going to use a positive and a negative. What are the two factors of 16 that are going to be 6 apart? Is it 4 and 4? 8 and 2. Perfection. So it's going to be positive 8 and negative 2. And then all you do with that y squared on the end now is you say, okay, it's going to be 8y and 2y. Okay, so that y squared there does not really add anything to our process. You just got to remember to put a y on the end of both terms. So just so that you get to go through this, I've got 2 examples for you with the letter squared on the end. So go ahead and do exercise 10. Right, so my x is squared, so that's got to be x times x. The 24, again, is negative, so I'm going to have a positive and a negative. The signs have to be different. And what factors of 24 are going to be 5 units away from each other? 8 and 3. So I'm going to make a -8 and then a +3. So they add up to -5. And then because of this y squared right here, I make it a +3y and a -8y. Okay, that's the only additional thing to do with that variable on the end. Exercise 11, another example of the same thing, just to make sure that we've covered it adequately before you see it on your homework later. All right, so one more time, we've got a squared, so that's a times a. The 27 is negative, so the signs have to be different, no option there. And then the two factors of 27 that are 6 units apart are what times what? Okay, 3 and 9, so the 3 will be positive, the 9 will be negative, so that they add up to -6. Again, remember, you have the tool of a calculator, so don't be afraid to pull out your calculator and just try flipping through factors. There's nothing wrong with that. That's actually how you learn your multiplication tables really good, is just messing around with your calculator. And then we're going to put a B on the end of each of those, and we're done. So I think we've covered quite thoroughly what to do if there is a 1 in front of the squared term. Okay, you're just unfoiling, you write down your parentheses and you follow the clues. The rest of our time today is going to be spent answering this question. Okay, what do we do? What to do if there is a number other than 1? So what to do if there is a number other than 1 in front of the squared term? Okay, so first thing you're going to do is this. You're going to look at the problem, and the first thing is you're going to, number 1 is you're going to check if there is a common factor, like we were doing last time we were together. When there is a common factor that you can pull out, it's always better to use smaller numbers than larger numbers, okay, than having to mess around with them. So example 5 is my example, and then you're going to have 1, and then we're going to move on to the other situation. So I've got in example 5, I've got 4x squared, I've got 16x, and I've got 12. Do those three coefficients, 4, 16, and 12, do they share a common factor? What is it? 4. Great. So I'm going to do just what we did in class last time and what you hopefully did on your homework over the weekend, is I'm going to factor that 4 out. And when I do that, 4x squared divided by 4 leaves me x squared. 16x divided by 4 leaves me 4x. And then 12 divided by 4 leaves me 3. Now that 4 that you factored out, that's part of the answer. So I'm gonna write it on the next line. And now I'm going to factor the x squared plus 4x plus 3, just like we factored the other things on the other, 20 problems we've already done today. So now I've factored out the 4. So just like the other problems, there is now a 1 in front of the x squared. All right, this is the simpler situation. X squared is x and x. There's a positive in front of the 3, so that means my signs are the same. And because of the 4, they're both going to be positive. And then the two factors of 3 that add up to 4 are just 1 and 3. Not a whole lot of choices for the number 3. Or 3 and 1. Doesn't matter what order you put them down in the parentheses. So try exercise 12. Same thing. Factor out the common factor first. you should be left with a trinomial that has a 1 in front of the squared term that you can then factor. And so on this particular problem, I've got 5w cubed minus 40w squared plus 60w. So what is the common factor they all share? A 5 and a w. Perfection. Great job. So 5w to the third, when I factor out the 5 and the w, leaves me w squared. Negative 40 divided by 5 is negative 8. I started with 2 w's. I factored 1 out, leaves me 1. And then 60 divided by 5 is 12, and I factored out the w. So that's what we're looking at. And so again, that 5w is part of the answer. Don't lose it. And as I mentioned and prepared you for, there is a 1 in front of the squared term. So w squared is just w times w. The 12 tells me the signs are going to be the same. The negative in front of the 8 says they're both going to be negatives. And then the two factors of 12 that are going to add up to 8 is going to be 6 and 2 or 2 and 6. Doesn't matter what order you throw them down. So always look for a common factor first. Makes your life a little easier. Whenever you can use smaller numbers, that's going to be good. But the rest of the problems are going to involve, I've got a number in front of the squared, but there's no common factor. Okay, so now now we have a number that is not 1. All right, Professor Dreyer is having a good one over there. So, all right. So here's my conundrum. There are several different ways that I can show you how to factor something when there is a number in front of the squared term. But I need a way that I can give you a process. So let me just tell you, if you have learned another way in a previous algebra course with another teacher, go ahead and use it. Okay, I only have time to show you one way to do this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a way that uses the grouping that we talked about last time. I call this the grouping method. Our book calls this the AC method. It absolutely does not matter what you call it. Some teachers in high school teach this, but they call it the lattice method. There's all sorts of different names. It doesn't matter what you call it, but this is the way I'm going to show you to factor. So again, if you have another way, that's fine. You don't have to use mine. Just make sure you can factor these things. So here's what we're going to do. I've got 3x squared plus 7x plus 2. The way that I'm going to show you to factor is we are going to take the first number and the last number, and we're going to multiply them together. Okay. So 3 times 2 is a positive 6. I'm going to write a positive 6 over here on the side. This is my scratch work. And here's what I'm going to do with the positive 6 now. I'm going to do the same thing with this positive 6 that we've done in all these other problems with that last number. So when I ask myself what factors of 3 add up to 4 and what factors of negative 24 add up to negative 5, we're going to do the same thing. And so what I'm going to ask myself is what factors of 6 are going to add up to 7? And that's what? 6 and 1. Perfect. Positive 6, positive 1. So it's the same question we've been asking. That's why I teach this method, is most of the questions are the same compared to what we've already done, so that it's a minimal. Now, here's what I'm going to do. Now, this is where we get into a little bit different than what we were doing. And the reason we have to do this differently is because of the 3 in front of the x squared. So I'm going to use these two factors, this 6 and this 1, to take this middle term, and I'm going to break it apart into 2 terms. So what I mean by that is this. I'm going to have my 3x squared. That doesn't change. And then instead of 7x, I'm going to write that as plus 6x plus 1x. You don't have to write the 1, I'm just writing it so that you know where that number went, and then plus 2. So again, just to reiterate, because I know that this might be the first time you're seeing this, maybe it's a new method for you. I'm taking this middle term, and I've broken it up into 2 terms. And the reason I've done that is now I have 4 terms here. I can use the grouping method, which we talked about last time in class. And so I can look at the first 2 terms by themselves and the second pair of terms by themselves. And so the first pair of terms, 3x squared plus 6x, they have a 3x in common. And 3x squared divided by 3x leaves me x. 6x divided by 3x leaves me plus 2. The second pair of terms don't have anything in common, but I do notice that's x plus 2. That's the same thing I have in parentheses right here. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to throw some parentheses around this x plus 2. We encountered that situation when we went through the first section. That happened to us, I think, once or twice. And I noticed the grouping did work. I've got an x plus 2 in the parentheses, so that's going to be my first factor. And then the second factor is what's left over, which is the 3x from the first term, and then the plus 1 from the second term. And the nice thing about factoring is if you're feeling a little unsure if you did the right thing, you can always just FOIL. When I multiply the x plus 2 times the 3x plus 1, first outers, inners, lasts, you will end up with 3x squared plus 7x plus 2. Okay, if you don't, then you made an arithmetic mistake. So just to recap, before I give you one of your own to do, I multiplied the first number and the last number and used that result to figure out my factors that add up to the middle. And then I used those 2 factors to write the middle number, the 7x, as 2 separate terms so that I could do factoring by grouping. Okay, this is called the grouping method to factoring. And this is the method that I'm going to show you. Exercise 13, give it a try. You got 5x squared plus 13x plus 6. And just to give you a little clue, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to multiply the 5 times the 6 and use that number. I'm just going to give everybody a nudge. I'm going to give you a little chance to keep thinking through. So 5 times 6 is a positive 30. Now I'm going to use that positive 30. I need the 2 factors of positive 30 that are going to have to positive 13. What 2 numbers are those? 3 and 10. Great. Or 10 and 3. It does not matter what order you put the 2 terms or what order you break up this middle number. It will work either way. So now, you didn't see that, now you do. So now what you're going to do is you're going to take the 3 and the 10, and you're going to break up this 13x into 3x and 10x. now, and then factor by grouping. Okay, I'm going to give you another 30 or 40 seconds to make a little more progress. We're going to go through this procedure several more times so that it locks into your brain. I know it's difficult. There's a few steps. So I'm going to take the 3 and the 10 that were the factors of 30, and I'm going to have 5x squared, and then I'm going to take the plus 3x, and then plus 10x. So notice 3x and 10x still add up to 13. I've not changed anything. I'm just writing it in a different format. And then I have that plus 6. So the whole thing we're trying to do is we just took that thing that was 3 terms and we wrote it as 4 terms so that I can use grouping, which we talked about last time. Okay, so that's why I do this method. Just try to draw on something we already did instead of teaching you something completely new. And so out of the first two, the 5x squared and the 3x, I can factor out an x. 5x squared divided by x leaves 5x. 3x divided by x is plus 3. The second pair of terms, the 10x and the 6, they share a 2. 10x divided by 2 is 5x, and 6 divided by 2 is 3. And the grouping worked. As we saw last section, I know the grouping works when I have the same exact thing in parentheses. Okay, so again, that's something we talked about. If you weren't here and you didn't get a chance to watch the video, make sure you go back through that first video. And so then we have 5x plus 3 is the first factor because that's what they have in common. And then what's left over from the first is an x, and from the second, a plus 2. And there is my factored expression. If you remultiply 5x plus 3 times x plus 2, it will work out to be our original trinomial. Any questions about this? I know this is difficult, but I know you can do this. Okay, you wouldn't be here if you weren't capable of this. Okay, so next one, exercise 14. Now I will give you a little hint. Notice that they add up to a negative 23. So your factors are going to both be negative this time. So again, what you're going to start off with is multiply the 3 times the 14. I promise you this factors. So if you have a calculator, if you need to use the calculator on your phone, okay, play around with the factors. It will work. All right, so let's see how you did here. I'm going to give you a little strategy because I understand sometimes numbers maybe have awkward factors. So 3 times 14. What's 3 times 14? Okay, it's positive 42. Great. And so I need the two factors of 42 that are going to add up to negative 23. So here's how you approach this. Okay, maybe you don't know the pair of factors that you need right away, but pair of factors you're probably familiar with that add up to 42 are 7 times 6. Right? 7 times 6 is 42. But 7 plus 6 does not add up to 23, so I need a different pair. The reason I told you to get your calculators is this. So 7 doesn't have any other factors, but what you can do is, what two factors make up 6? 2 and 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the 2, and so I'm going to take the 2 and move it over here with the 7. What's 2 times 7? 14. And then just use your calculator. 42 divided by 14 turns out to be 3, which was also the numbers that we start out with. 14 and 3, that's 17. Still not quite. So what I'm going to do with the 6 is, instead of moving the 2 over here, I'm going to move the 3 over here. So 7 times 3 is 21. And when I do 42 divided by 21, I have 2. Oh, there they are. 21 and 2 is 23. So all you need to do, and I understand it's trial and error. It's a little annoying sometimes when you have to do it, but all you're doing is moving the factors of a pair of numbers you know around until you find the ones. I promise you, everything I give you will factor. So I'm going to use the 21 and 2. I also noticed that they both have to be negative, so it's negative 21 and negative 2 that I'm going to use. For the same reason that the problem's on the first page, when this last number is positive, it means the signs are the same, and then this is what they have to add up to, a negative. So I've got 3x squared minus 21x minus 2x plus 14. The rest of this is grouping, like we did last Wednesday. Out of the 3x squared and the 21x, I can factor out a 3 and an x. 3x squared divided by 3x leaves me x. Negative 21x divided by 3x leaves me negative 7. There we go. We encountered this last time. I'm looking ahead. I noticed that my signs are the opposite of what they should be. The x term here is negative, and the x term in the parentheses is positive. The number here is positive. The number in parentheses is negative. So that is my clue. We talked about this last time. That's my clue that I have to factor out a negative as well as a 2. Negative 2x divided by negative 2, a negative divided by a negative is a positive x. 14 divided by negative 2 is negative 7. And again, the grouping worked. Okay, x minus 7 on both of them. And then what's left over from the first is 3x. From the second is minus 2. Honestly, if you can do that problem, if you can at least follow along, I understand that you're learning the pattern and it's going to take a little time, but if you can understand that problem, they don't really get any harder than that one right there. Okay, I mean, that's a kind of an awkward factor, and you got to worry about the negatives and things like that. Let's try exercise 15. I'll give you a little hint. I tried to pick the obvious factors of the number that you get. just to see how we got started here, and then I'll give you a little more time. What does your calculator tell you that 4 times 35 is? Okay, positive 140. And then I need the two factors of positive 140 that are going to add up to negative 24. What'd you try? Yeah, that's I tried to pick obvious ones because I'm not trying to goof with you. I just want you to learn how to factor. This ends in a 0, so you know 10 is one of the factors. So that's always a good place to start. So we're going to use negative. It doesn't matter what order. I don't remember what order they got told to me. I'm going to use negative 10 and negative 14. If you use the negative 14 first, if you're already that far along, you will end up with the same pair of factors I do, I promise. Okay, go ahead and finish the grouping part to this problem. All right, so let's see how you did. So I'm going to take the 4x squared. I'm going to put in a negative 10x and a negative 14x. And you can see negative 10 and negative 14 adds up to negative 24x. So again, I've not changed anything. I've just reformatted what I started with. And the reason I reformatted is I wanted it to have 4 terms so I can use my grouping method that we talked about last time. So now from the 4x squared and the 10x, they share a 2 and an x. 4x squared divided by 2x leaves 2x. Negative 10x divided by 2x is negative 5. Again, my signs are the opposite of what they should be. And what I mean by that is this is a negative 14x term, and I need a positive x term. This is a positive 35, and my number needs to be negative. So that tells me take out a negative, as well as that 7 that those two terms have in common. And when I do that, negative 14 divided by negative 7 is 2x, and 35 divided by negative 7 is negative 5. The grouping worked, boom, boom. So I've got 2x minus 5, and then what's left over is 2x and a minus 7 from those two terms. Again, if you FOIL first outers, inners, lasts, you will get what you started with. All right, we've got 3 more times around to practice this more. In these last 3, I've changed the sign. So in this first one, I'm just going to have you do the first step. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to multiply the first and the last right here. And then I want you to pick the appropriate pair of factors and then stop. Let's just regroup and make sure we've all got the same thing before we press on. All right, so let's see how you did there. 12 times negative 2. Notice that 2's negative. 12 times negative 2 is negative 24. And just like the problems on the front page, when I have a negative last number, that means what about the signs of my factors? Got to have one of each. right? I've got to have a positive and a negative, or a negative and a positive. It doesn't matter what order you put those two things down. I don't care. It's not going to affect the problem. But what does affect the problem is this. What factors of 24 are going to be 5 apart? Okay, 3 and 8. So we're going to have a positive 3 and a negative 8 because they have to add up to negative 5. Okay. So the decision making, again, is very similar to what we did on the first page with our factors. Okay. So now, finish out the problem. I'm going to give you a minute to do that. Use the 3 and the negative 8 to separate this middle term into 2 terms, and then factor by grouping. All right, let's see how you did. You can ask any questions you need to. So I've got the 12m squared, and then I'm going to put a plus 3m and then minus 8m. Again, I just want to repeat this because I don't want anybody to leave here confused. If you put the negative 8m first and the plus 3m second, your problem will work out, okay? Your next step will look a little different than mine, but we'll get to the same ending point. Okay. So now I can group. So out of the first 2 terms, between 12 and 3, I can factor out a 3 and an m. 12m squared divided by 3m leaves 4m. 3m divided by 3m leaves plus 1. Don't forget that plus 1. It is important to the end of the problem. And then I've got a negative in front of both of these numbers, so I've got to factor out a negative to get my signs right. And then between 8 and 2, they have a 2 in common. Negative 8m divided by negative 2 is positive 4m. Negative 2 divided by negative 2 is a positive 1. Grouping worked. I got the exact same thing in parentheses. That's how I make that determination. And so because of that, the common factor is the 4m plus 1. That's what both of them have. And then what's left over from the first one, 3m, and then minus 2 from the second one. There's my 2 binomials that multiply to give me what I started with. All right, we just got 2 more. So if you got any questions, you're running low on time. Exercise 17, give that one a go. Make sure to pay notes to the signs. Just to get you started, the 8 times the -3 is a -24. Since it's a -24, I'm going to have a positive and a negative factor. And I need the two factors of 24 that are going to be 10 apart. What two factors of 24 are 10 apart? 4 and -6. Okay, now 4 and -6 do give you -24. But what does your calculator tell you you get when you add 4 and -6? That's going to be what? That's going to be -2. So that's not quite the right pair to choose for this one. So I need the ones that are 10 apart. That is going to be -12, +2. Yeah. Don't be afraid to make a mistake here. Okay. Your calculator can help you verify, but this is a good starting place. Once you identify the 4 and the 6, you can go from there. Okay. All right. So finish up, give you another minute, and then we got one more problem on our agenda. All right, so I'm going to use the 2 and the -12. So I've got 8y squared. I'm going to put them in the order plus 2y minus 12y minus 3. Okay, this is the last time I'll repeat this. If you put the -12y first and the plus 2y second, your problem will still work. Okay, we will end up with the same thing. So my grouping step, I'm going to factor out the 2y out of the first pair. 8 and 2 share a 2. 8y squared divided by 2y is 4y. 2y divided by 2y is +1. The second pair of terms, they are both negatives, so I'm going to factor that negative out, as well as the 3 that 12 and 3 have in common. -12 divided by -3 is 4y. -3 divided by -3 is +1. The grouping worked. I've got a 4y plus 1 in common to both of those. From the first term, 2y is left over. From the second term, a -3 is left over. And there's my two factors. So before you engage the last problem, exercise 18, just one little hint. Last time we were together, I told you something that makes factoring easier is if there is a negative in front of my first term, factor that negative out. It makes the process just go a little smoother. So the first step you're going to do on this problem is you're going to factor out the negative out of the 3 terms, and that negative will be part of the answer. And then you're going to factor by grouping or whatever method you're using what's left. All right, let's roll through this problem, see how you did on your way out today. If you have any questions that we need to follow up on, just please stop by. I'm going to be standing right here. So I factored the negative out, and so what's left is now a positive 6x squared, positive 13x, and a negative 5. I'm now going to do my grouping process on this. So I'm going to multiply the 6 times the negative 5 and get negative 30. Since it's a negative 30, I know one of my factors is positive, one is negative, and the two factors of negative 30 that are going to add up to positive 13 are going to be positive 15 and negative 2. So this negative, I'm just going to draw a little arrow. The negative will be part of my answer down here at the end. I'm not going to worry about it in the meantime. So now I'm going to take the 6x squared and then plus 15x and then minus 2x and minus 5. Factor out the 3 and the x from that first pair of terms. And so when I do that, 6x squared divided by 3x is 2x. 15x divided by 3 is plus 5. Both of the last pair of terms are negative, so I'm going to factor out that negative. And there's nothing else in common to those. So negative 2x divided by negative is positive 2x. Negative 5 divided by negative is a positive 5. The grouping worked. So that factor in common is the 2x plus 5. In addition to the negative I factored out at the very beginning. And then what's left over is a 3x and a minus 1. And there's my completely factored expression that would give me what I started with.